2012, and this one just recently in May. Twan has been Booker longlisted 3 times. This is his 3rd time. So, in many ways, this is a celebration of the book. And his previous novel, Garden of Evening Mists, is not only longlisted for the Booker, but it made the shortlist. It also won the 2012 Man Asian Literary Prize, the 2013 Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction, and the 2014, he was shortlisted for the 2014 Impact Dublin Award. And of course, the last time that we were together here in Kinokuniya talking about his work was when the film of Garden of Evening Mists was released, which many of you probably saw on Astro. So it is with great joy we welcome back Twan, and we look forward to asking some interesting questions about his latest novel. I'm going to kick things off with some questions, and after that I'm going to throw things open to the audience too, because I know you will have some very searching questions to ask him that I probably haven't thought about. There's there's part of the book that made me laugh. There's one of the characters, Jeffrey Crosby, that's right, who's a reporter, and he's the brother of Leslie, who's one of the main protagonists of the book, and he's preparing to interview Somerset Maugham about the book, and Somerset Maugham is thinking about all the boring and banal questions that he's been asked by people interviewing him in the past. So I not only laughed at that point in the book, but I also kind of thought, oh Sharon, you've got to be really careful. Make sure your questions aren't incredibly banal and stupid like this guy asking questions to Somerset Maugham. Anyway, that's a little bit of a cautionary tale. So I'd like to start off by asking Twan, what were the particular challenges of writing this novel? There's actually an 11-year, not a 10-year, an 11-year gap between the previous novel being published and this one. What happened in that 11 years? What was the path of this novel to publication? And I came across a very interesting interview on the Al Jazeera website, where you talked about you were writing one novel and it wasn't really working, and then you went back to the drawing board again and changed it. So can you take us on that journey with you?
Well, hello, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. As Sharon said, it's been 3 years since we were last here, so it's good to be back. My home away from home. Let's start with your question. What was the question again? It's quite long, wasn't it?
What particular challenges did you face?
Well, challenge number 1 was trying to pay attention to. And I want to first stress that, at every of these events, and I've done quite a number since May, everyone has mentioned that, oh, it's been 10 years since your last book. Every single event. What's wrong with you all?
That was one of those questions, wasn't it?
Am I not allowed to have a life? One of the challenges was, as you mentioned, I had in mind another book, a much bigger project, but I had some health issues with my knee, so I felt that it was too much of a project to take on at the same time, so I thought I would write this little story that I had in mind, which I felt would not require a lot of research, because come on, it's set in Penang. I know a lot about Penang. So, but to my dismay and horror, when I started working on this, I realized I knew nothing. I knew nothing at all. So I started to have to really do a lot of research to get. There's so many things I didn't know, and it was quite difficult as well getting materials for research. It's a very strange thing writing books set in the past, where you get a way lot more materials if your book was set in the 1500s, isn't it? But if you want to set your book in 1941, 1950, 1910, there seems to be a lack of materials to use. That was quite a surprising thing. So that was one of the main difficulties of writing that. Secondly was the book did not work at all. For a long time, I struggled to find the shape, and nothing worked. One of my friends read the first draft, the first few drafts, and he said it was terrible. He said, "You can't publish this." He said, "I got so bored reading it. I got so confused. Is Leslie the same as Ethel? Who is Ethel?" That was very disheartening because in my mind, I felt that I had written this great piece of literature, and then to have somebody say, "You know, this is one of the worst things you've ever read." So I had to keep going back to that, to keep trying to find a way to solve the problems. I couldn't find a way to solve the problems. Eventually, about I think 2 years ago, when I finally finished it, I felt I'd finished it, and this time, even my friend who had read the first draft, he didn't want to read it. He said, "It's fine. I don't want to go through that again." He said. So I sent it off to my agent and she has a reader as well who reads. And you know, when you send stuff off to your agent and your publisher, you're hoping that they straight away come back to you the next morning. You say, "Oh, I read it through the night, I couldn't sleep, and it's excellent." No, my agent took about 2 weeks. She came back to me, and her words were, "We have to set up an online meeting to discuss this." So the heart sank straight away, even further. We had a meeting, and they just said, "This doesn't work. This doesn't work." Eventually. So after a while, I had to say that we need a fresh set of eyes to look at this, because by this time it was almost 8 years already. I had lost all objectivity already. I didn't know whether it's good or bad. So we got Francis Bickmore from Canongate. He's the editor of Canongate, and he's been the last 3-4 years. He's been asking about progress on the book, but I didn't feel right to ask him to look at it, because at that stage I had not signed with Canongate at all. I wasn't with them. But he was very keen, so he came in and said, "Yeah, how do you know?" So he didn't take 2 weeks. He took 4. It's even worse. And then he said, he called me and said, "Yes, I've read your book." And I was thinking, "Yeah, finally, thanks." And he said, "Yes, we want it. We want to buy the book." I was quite surprised. Long silence, and then I said, "Are you sure?" Because I was trying to give him a face-saving way to pull up, because in case he's changed his mind while talking to me. I said, "You really don't have to. Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes." So we got to work, and to my surprise, he didn't make extensive changes at all. One of the main things he really wanted me to do was, he said, yes, the chapters were confusing, but he said it's very easily solved. You just put a chapter heading for, time, location, year, and who's narrating it. If it's Leslie, you put Leslie on top. If Somerset Maugham, yeah, he wanted that. I said no. Well, it's like, I hate that. It's like watching a Tom Cruise film. There's always a, Pentagon, 2:45 p.m. I hate that. So I was, but in the end, I capitulated, and I put all that in, and then to my dismay, I found that yes, he was right. He was so right. And after that, whatever changes he suggested, I said, fine, I'll do it. Because also, to be honest, by that time I was so sick of the book. I just wanted it out. The thought of having to work through it again and rewrite, I just didn't want to face it anymore. And it was even worse when, after everything had been edited to our satisfaction, and the worst part was the copy editing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was even worse. Well, you really had to read every line and check for mistakes. Because once you send them off, you say, "Oh, that's the last I've seen of it. Okay, that's fine. I can live again." and then they send it back to you, and okay, you will start checking for mistakes. Yeah, it was one of the hardest books to write. The first one was very easy, but a lot of writers told me that it's going to get easier with every book that you write. He lied. It gets harder and harder. The second book was terrible. I thought this one was even worse. So I dread the next few that are going to come. I really dread that.
Oh my goodness. I really like the way that the book is organized, and I found this in many ways the most accessible of your three books, and maybe the kind of like the neatest, in terms of everything tying up.
Well, because there are chapter headings there.
But they worked, yeah. And I think what you said is a great encouragement to writers, because I think every writer really struggles with the book that they're writing, and it's great to hear that a writer who is so successful and writes such great books also struggles so much with the craft and needs other people to kind of come in and give suggestions and help about things like structure. Okay, I want to move on a little bit, if you're okay with that, to the characters in the book. I think you're incredibly ambitious. You always give so much plot in your stories, and in this book you weave in not one but several real historical characters. You've got W. Somerset Maugham, Willie Maugham. You've got his lover Gerald Haxton. You've got Ethel Proudlock, who murders her lover on the veranda of the house where they're living. And you've got Sun Yat-sen, the Chinese revolutionary. So you've got these different threads running through the book and so much to bring together. I think of all the characters, the one that I feel most drawn to is Maugham himself. I have always been a fan of Somerset Maugham, especially his short stories. I read my way through all of them when I first came to live in Malaysia. But I had never known very much about him as a person. And in the book, he just seems so real to me. How did you research Maugham, and how did you feel about Maugham as you wrote about him? And was there a kind of writer's sympathy for him in this, as he talks about his craft of writing? Did you find any similarities between him and yourself?
Well, I first heard about Somerset Maugham when I was a young child, and through the short story, The Letter, I found that a very well written short story, and imagine my surprise and delight when I also discovered that he had based it on a real life murder trial which had taken place in Kuala Lumpur in 1910. So the interest in Somerset Maugham has been there from a very long time. But like you, he was quite an, despite his worldwide fame, he was quite an enigmatic figure. He was a very private person. It was quite difficult doing research on him, but I read literally all the biographies that have been written about Somerset Maugham. I read books about him written by his nephew, by his friends, or more interesting, by his enemies. That's if you want to know somebody, you always read what's written by the enemies, not the friends.
Who were the enemies?
Quite a few who didn't like him, and read his short stories and most of his novels. He's a better short story writer than a novelist, I feel. A lot of his novels I found very tedious to read. So it was difficult to create him on page, because there's the assumption, a lot of people have mentioned to me that, it must be so easy writing about these real life figures because they are already there, you just have to transcribe them onto the page. But actually the opposite is true, because you are so restricted by them, their personalities, their characteristics, that you can't move your plot the way you want it to, in the direction that you want to. You always have to be aware that would Somerset Maugham have said this thing? Would he have acted this way? Would he have gone to this party or this country? I would have loved to have put him in a lot more parties in the book, but I couldn't, because he was not he didn't like going to parties. He was very private. He wasn't very social or sociable. Most of the stories, there's again the well-known impression that Somerset Maugham traveled the world and then got people in Malaya and Singapore in the Fiji Islands to tell him their darkest secrets.
Yeah.
Most of the time, I found out it wasn't him. It was because he was very shy to start with because he had a very bad stammer, so he hated being in public where he had to find the next word. He hated that. And it was actually his secretary, Gerald Haxon, who was the party boy, and Gerald loved drinking, whoring, gambling, so everywhere he went, these are the things he did. And he was the one who got people to open up to with their secrets. There's a very funny anecdote where he and Mom were traveling somewhere, I think in the Fiji Islands, and Mom had already gone to sleep because he's an early bird. He goes to bed early. So Gerald was drinking somewhere, getting drunk, meeting friends, gambling. But around midnight, he rushed back to the hotel and banged on Somerset Maugham's room and said, "Willie, you gotta wake up! You gotta wake up now! I just heard this incredible story, and I have to tell you now. You have to listen, because by tomorrow I would have forgotten all about it." So so they were a team. They work well together. So that's the thing. All these things I had to bear in mind when I'm writing and creating him on the page. I can't make him to be too gregarious or too open. So he always had to be this very reserved, very shy person. It is very difficult writing using real life characters. The same with Dr. Sun Yat-sen as well, because he's even more well known in Asia. He's even more revered. Unlike Somerset Maugham. So Sun Yat-sen, you have to, if you describe anything that's not particularly flattering about Sun Yat-sen, you better have evidence to back it up, because he has still today a lot of very, very loyal supporters. Same with Ethel Proudlaw. Ethel was one of the most difficult characters to write because there's so little about her. And I think one of the reasons is because she was intentionally erased. She was one of the earliest cases of cancellation because of what she did, and we will go on to that, I think, later on in the story. Any questions?
Yeah, very much so. There's a moment with Maugham when he's opening the envelope to take out the copy of his book that's just arrived from his publisher, and I kind of thought, is there something of Twan in there taking out his first copy of his brand new book?
I think it's for every writer in this room. You do, we just smell. Yeah, that's our baby. You see, I don't like human babies. That's it. But I would cradle my new book and smell it. And, and a lot of Somerset Maugham's frustrations are mine. So that was one of the fun parts about writing about a writer, because you basically can just put in all your irritations and frustrations in there. Because I think all writers feel that way, the same. The book work isn't going well, or the publishers aren't paying you enough, or they aren't organizing more publicity, interviews, things like that. Every writer complains about that. So, yeah.
Yes. I think you make him a very sympathetic character. He's quite vulnerable. He's been quite ill after his terrible experience in Sarawak, falling into the river because of the tidal bore. And with his stammer and everything, I think he does seem quite a vulnerable character almost. I find it very interesting the way that Leslie shifts her attitude towards him in the book. At the beginning of the book,
well, she didn't like the idea, but when she heard that her husband had invited these two men to stay with them, she wasn't happy at all. Especially when she realized what they were, these two men. But there's so it's you have to again, it comes down, I've been saying last week, to the nuts and bolts of creating a plot and a narrative. You have to create narrative tension right from the start. Now, if the two of them have been so happy and got along together, you didn't want to read it. You didn't want to get reading about them going on picnics or riding trishaws together. You didn't want it. You wanted them to to dislike each other. You
Yes.
wanted them to argue. You want to get on each other's nerves. That's where I think we're like that. We I suppose you call it Schadenfreude, isn't it? We want to
Yeah.
see other people suffering. Thank goodness it's not me, you know. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying. Bring me the popcorn, and I'm going to enjoy that.
I think the pleasure of the first third of the book is really the way that their relationship gradually they come closer together and they begin to like each other and even respect each other. And by the end of that, Leslie is beginning to trust him with her story and as well as Ethel's story, which is quite a long journey that she's come in warming to Morn. I really like that. I want to talk about Leslie and her narration, because the book is divided into chapters, some of which Leslie narrates, and other chapters which are in third person, which are the chapters about Willie Morn. It's third person subjective, isn't it? You know, you're inside his thoughts, but it's still third person. Leslie's narration intrigues me because her memory is so sharp. Her recall of even the tiniest detail. We were eating chicken chop and I dipped my chicken chop into the gravy. I was in the garden and a sparrow burst out of a bush. They're tiny, incredibly specific memories. It makes me wonder, which point in time is she narrating this from, and is she telling her own story, perhaps on paper? Maybe she's writing a memoir.
Well, the little details that I wanted to remember is an additional function as well. Now, you mentioned that Somerset Maugham's chapters are told in the third person and Leslie's in the first person. There's a reason for that. Initially, they were all in the first person. But I felt that there was so much information about Somerset Maugham that the reader had to know that I couldn't have his chapters in the first person. It would be unnatural for him to be telling everything about his own life and his past. So Maugham's chapters are in the third person for that reason, but also because I wanted to contrast with Leslie. Leslie is a woman living in the 1900s. Her world is very confined, very restricted, very small, very narrow. So she only knows what she can see. Contrast that with Somerset Maugham, who's been traveling the world since a young age. So his world is way larger and more open. So there's that immediately the contrast as well. And because Leslie's world is so constricted, when you're a prisoner in such a narrow space, what else do? You focus on the tiny details. You remember all these small items, inconsequential data. But that's all you have when your world is so small. And that's part of the reason as well too. But it's also the writer trying to convey the atmosphere and the detail and the period details to the reader. So there's all these trivia as well. It's more believable, I feel, than when a child is narrating. Then there's suddenly all these huge words and detail, and you just find that the voice is wrong because the child doesn't think like that, doesn't talk like that. But then in the narration, the child sounds like a 60-year-old professor. And it just doesn't work for me.
I wonder. She tells her story to Somerset Maugham, and Maugham used to go around and collect stories from people and write them into his stories. Is she actually disappointed, do you think, or relieved that he doesn't actually tell the story of her infidelity?
Well, she does in a way. You see, what Leslie is also a very cunning person. Somerset Maugham is using her, she knows that, but she's also using Somerset Maugham as well for her own reasons. And one of the main reasons is that she is hoping to use Maugham to send a message out to the world. She's sending a message to a particular person across time. She knows that the only way that this message will reach that person is through Somerset Maugham, but this message has to span years, probably decades, she doesn't know. But whoever, that person who reads it eventually will understand and hopefully will respond. So this is what Leslie is doing. She is creating a message to transmit beyond time. And hence, there's the opening lines of the book. Every sentence in this book, because as you helpfully told me, it's been 11 years, has been worked again and again and again, so that there are built-in intentionally resonances, echoes to other things happening in the book later on. So when you read it again, hopefully you will, you start to see why. You will see why there's the first sentence is there.
Okay, let's read the first sentence. A story, like a bird of the mountain, can carry a name beyond the clouds, beyond even time itself. Willie Morm said that to me many years ago. Lovely.
So the whole thing isn't just getting from A to Z. The story isn't like that. It's actually, again, with the symbolism of the house of doors. In that scene in the book, I have Leslie saying that, this space here inside the shop house in Armenian Street in Georgetown, where it's hung with all these doors, it's like a maze, an ever-shifting maze, where basically you can enter at any point and exit at any point that you choose. It's just not like a traditional maze where there's only one entrance and one exit. It's everywhere. So everything resonates, turns, shifts, it's changing all the time. That's why it took 11 years. But also because I was lazy as well. So.
I love this central image of the House of Doors, and it seems to be quite a dreamlike image. How did you come to it? And I didn't really know about painted Chinese doors, but do people actually have collections of them?
I think somebody actually told me after the book was published, of course, because I didn't steal the idea. Just about 2 months ago, a friend in Penang sent me a photograph, and he said, there's this guy on the mainland somewhere, and he collects all these old fittings and window fittings and shutters and doors as well. He's got a huge warehouse somewhere on just across Penang, and he asked me, "Do you want to go and see?" I said, "No." So there are, I was surprised. I'm not surprised actually, because they are such works of art, and somebody should be collecting these doors if if the building is to be demolished. It's a waste. A lot of the fittings are very intricate and well constructed, and to consign them to the scrap heap is a crime. So that was, I suppose, part of my wish fulfillment when I was writing that. I wish somebody would do that.
It is like something from a dream, though.
Yes, and I have to admit as well, that scene wasn't in the first draft that my editor Francis read.
Wow.
Yeah, and no, he didn't ask me to. It's just that I suddenly got quite annoyed with him with all his criticisms, and I said, okay, I'm gonna show you what I can do. You expect this level from me, I will push myself and go beyond that. So that was that, and the phosphorescent swimming scene that came as well later. Yes.
Oh, I mean that's another incredibly powerful scene, very visual scene. And I remember when we were talking about Garden of Evening Mists, one of the things I said to you was, you love sparkly things, the fireflies in Gift of Rain, like the fire lanterns in Garden of Evening Mist, and now we've got the luminescence of the sea, things that sparkle.
Well, I think it's such a great visual image, isn't it? To play with light and shadow, to create this sense of feeling of magic.
One feature of your style is the absolutely beautiful descriptions, sometimes in a few words, which is so powerful. And often, yes, they do have to do with light and effects of light and shade. I'm always, every time we've spoken, I think I've come back to this, the beautiful imagery of the book. One feature that I notice is that you use some very strong verbs, unusual verbs. I mean, things that make you stop for a moment. Morning is decanting its light down the slopes of the far mountains. That word, decanting. Twilight was roosting in the trees. The garden seethed with the tinnitus of the cicadas. The sea was craped in a million ever-shifting creases. I mean, these are absolutely gorgeous. And there are one or two images which almost seem like haikus. The earth had tilted the sea away from the shore, exposing a vast mirror that reflected the white clouds foaming across the sky. My eyes followed the two birds as they drift on the span of their outstretched wings, writing circles over circles on the empty page of the sky. Any comments about the language and how you come to this beautiful, polished prose?
All I can say is it gets harder and harder, so you're going to see less and less of it. You're just going to see the sky was blue. It is so hard to come up with those. I sympathize. I understood Somerset Maugham when he at one stage in his life he was so successful. He had 4 plays running at the West End. His books were selling so well. And one afternoon, his agent had lunch with him, and the agent told Willie Maugham, and he said, you're earning so much money that you don't ever really have to work again unless you want to. At Somerset Maugham, when he left the restaurant, it was sunset, he was very happy. And then he suddenly realized, I'm thinking about all these things, but look at the gorgeous sunset happening over London skies. Look at that, it's so beautiful. And Maugham said in his diaries, I looked at that beautiful sunset and I thought, thank goodness I'm rich enough that I don't ever have to describe another beautiful sunset. So
This seems cynical to me. I imagined you sitting there on the beach in Penang, romantically looking out and writing notes down.
So it's very difficult. It's in many times I try to evolve my writing style. As you probably noticed with The Gift of Rain and Garden, and now that you can see that there's a paring away of excess. One of the reasons, as I said, it's hard to write like The Gift of Rain. It's terribly hard to create something original and striking, and yet which makes you, the reader, when you read it, say, yes, that's exactly how it is. Why did not somebody describe it that way all along? This is how it looks like. So it's incredibly hard, but I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy trying to compress all these emotions into those single sentences.
Absolutely. I think the Tourist Development Corporation, or whatever it is at Penang, must really love you, because the book is a love song to Penang. The love of Penang comes through. And the scenes are so beautifully realized, and you feel like a fly on the wall in those scenes set in Kasawari House, watching the goings on in that beautiful house and garden. And when Leslie walks through Georgetown along Armenian Street, you can see the whole scene. There's a beautiful scene set in the docks, with all the different groups of people, the coolies and the pilgrims going off to Jeddah, to the Hajj, and the bullock carts and everything. The detail is so absolutely beautiful. How did it feel coming back to write about Penang again after your first novel? And and how hard was this prose? Did you go to photographs or paintings, or what did you draw it from?
Well, it was. I had mixed feelings when I realized that the book would only work if it was set in Penang, because I didn't want people to say, oh, he's already written about Penang and The Gift of Rain, and now he's going back there again. So the number one problem was I had to sort of skim through The Gift of Rain and see where it's the settings and the scenes. I said, you better not have the same stuff in the same locations again. So I had to make notation, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. It was quite difficult trying to find new places to write about because I think I had written about almost everything in The Gift of Rain. So I had to really. That's why that's why Leslie doesn't go around the town a lot. It was difficult finding new places for the characters to discover. It was that was one of the difficulties. I looked at photographs and postcards from the early 1900s were very helpful. And it helps as well that in Penang, so many parts are still, as I imagine they would look 100 years ago. So that's very useful for a writer. And I hope it doesn't change because it's moving so fast now. Everything's changing.
It is. Northern Road, the
gone,
beautiful houses along Northern Road have largely disappeared.
So yes, it was in a way it was also nice to write about Penang, especially because it was set 20 years before The Gift of Rain. So I felt that okay, I have more leeway and also to write about certain things that were just beginning to be constructed then, like for instance the pagoda, the KLCC pagoda, when there's a scene in there where they were just starting to build it. So I like the idea that these characters were there at the start instead of what you see this huge thing. So it was nice to go back to almost the origin of Penang as we know today and see it before it became this tourist site.
Yeah, I love the scene in the graveyard in the Protestant cemetery, and where they're looking at all the tombs of all the different famous people who lived there. And of course, you can still see them today. And looking at the tomb of Anna Leon Owens, who was, of course, the Anna and the King later on in the Hollywood version of her. And I love the account of going up Penang Hill, being carried in those.
Julie's, yes.
I forgot the name. Yes, really quite amazing.
Well, it's again the visit to the cemetery is also it ties into one of the themes of the book, which is Leslie has this fear of being forgotten because she feels that she's lived an interesting life and she doesn't want to be forgotten the way that her friend was. Ethel Cramer was cancelled and forgotten. Leslie in one of the scenes asked Somerset Maugham, why is it that for a woman to be remembered, a woman either has to be a queen or a whore? What about the women like me who live mundane, average lives? Who will remember us when we're gone? So her telling Willie Maugham her story is, in a way, her idea of this is a way that I can ensure that I will be remembered, and also that Ethel can be remembered as well. So it's a fear of being remembered, and the visit to the cemetery also underlines that.
Yeah, talking about being remembered. I was amazed at how few people had heard of the story of Ethel Proudlock and so on in KL. I went to Victoria Institution because I was supervising student teachers on their practicum. And I talked to the teachers there and I said, has anyone here, do you know or do the boys know anything about the story of this scandalous murder that happened in the grounds of Victoria Institution, and no one knew about it. And I think that's really sad, that so much of what's interesting in terms of history does so easily get forgotten. And a lot of colonial history, I think people don't want to know about. I have that impression. I have that impression in Kuala Kangsar with Anthony Burgess. It's like, well, we're not really interested in him because he was British.
Also, Anthony Burgess offended everyone there, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. So was he cancelled? I think he was cancelled in a
But
way.
it's also, in the case of Victoria Institution, I think one of the reasons they've forgotten is because the school changed locations as well.
Yeah.
So the murdered which took place at VI originally, is not the same place where the present VI is now.
That's
you know.
right.
I hadn't realized that when I was doing my research. So when I was looking at all the maps, I got terribly confused. I said, where's the river? Where's the house? And then I realized, of course, they moved the school.
Yes, they did. That bungalow where it took place, the
On the
location
river,
is no longer.
And
It's
Ethel-
nearer to the
Ethel-
railway
yeah.
station.
And we were talking about Ethel. Yeah, she was one of the first people to be cancelled by her own community because after she was found
Guilty.
yes, she her community just did not want her there anymore because she was seen as because she was the first white woman to be charged with murder in colonial Malaya. Before before that, all these
Yeah.
they were all saying be and
Yeah. And it's
they did, they don't sweat, they don't smell, they're perfect. So for Ethel to be
Well
charged
done,
with murdering someone, the expert community felt that she had let down the side. So after she was found guilty, they said, okay, you have to. They exiled her, and then they wrote her. They intentionally forgot about her. So I think that's one of the reasons why people were upset when Somerset Maugham published the letter, and he stirred up all the muck
Yes.
again, you know. And people were upset, because they said, we wanted to forget that.
Yeah, and she actually changed things politically because for the first time the citizens of the ordinary citizens of the Straits settlements were able to see that the British are not
Yes.
inviolable, and this in the end. I mean, it's not in your novel, but in the historical account. It was the Sultan of Selangor who pardoned her, so it's the first time that the British had to ask for the
No, it's in the book.
authority. Oh, it's in the book.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, can't remember where I read it. You know that this guy had to, the Sultan had to step in and actually save her from the gallows. My goodness, so things shifted for the British community at that point in time. I thought it was very clever the way that you slipped in a link with your first novel, The Gift of Rain,
Oh, yes.
through one of the characters.
Well,
I don't know if anyone else noticed.
Well, it's
you did.
it was mentioned in The Gift of Rain, but I've always felt that scene. I wanted to see it. I didn't want one of the characters to just talk about it in The Gift of Rain. I wanted to experience it. So in this book, I had the opportunity to create that scene and for Leslie to be there. And it's also, I suppose, I feel that this is probably going to be the last book for a while that I'll set in Malaysia and Malaya. So it's a sort of a farewell as well to bring in all the elements from the first two books. There are some elements from Garden as well. The name of the tea is the same in there. So this is just to tie up everything. My Malayan trilogy.
I've got another one. The door that's in Leslie's house, the bird over the mountains, relates to the Garden of Evening Mists, right?
If you think it is.
No. To the story about the two Japanese pilots beyond the clouds.
Well, of course, I'll say yes now. You say.
Yeah, I was looking.
Because I'm so clever, I saw everything.
I was looking for these links as well.
So it's a sort of a tying up, to tie everything, the whole entire thing together, and to move on to other places and countries in the next books. Yes.
Okay, I want to ask you about that. The beginning and the ending of this novel take place in South Africa, and you also do an amazing job at creating the atmosphere of South Africa. So, might we see a South African novel?
I don't know. I have no idea. If a story strikes me, I might. But at the moment, I'm more interested in Asia and the history of Asia and how what happened 100 years ago is still impacting us today and messing things up for us today. So I'm more interested in that rather than South Africa, because I can't think of any stories set there. And there are so many good writers mining the field in South Africa. That I don't want to to step onto the territory as well.
Okay, yeah.
Because I'm still Malaysian. I still feel Malaysian. I'm Malaysian. So for me, the heart is here in this part of the world. So it's,
But you do a lovely job of linking the two places, and you've done this
well,
industrial ones.
when this book was launched in South Africa, somebody asked me, "Oh, is it because you love the Karoo so much that you set the scenes there?" I said, "No, actually, I hate the Karoo, and the reason I put Leslie there is to punish her." It's really yes.
It doesn't feel like it.
It is because for no, you haven't been to the Karoo. To come from this lush landscape and then to go to the bleakness of the Karoo, for her was hell. And it's her 40 years in the desert because of what she had done. It's also again it comes down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling. I had to put her in an isolated location where she doesn't really hear much of what's happening in the outside world. She doesn't know what's happened to a particular person.
Yes.
She doesn't know what happens to Somerset Maugham as well. So she's isolated. She's living this life, and then when the parcel, the book comes and is delivered to her, that's why it has such an impact on her, because this is the first inkling that the message that she sent out 20, 30 years ago has been received. So that's why again, a lot of times when the readers think, oh, he's done this because it's so glamorous and it's so pretty. No, it comes down to the requirements of the storytelling, the possibility of the plot. Sorry to disillusion you, but
Thanks, sir. Thanks so much.
so proud.
No, that's all right. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm now going to throw the questions out to the floor, so if you would like...
Please feel free to ask whatever
Yes,
questions. Yeah, don't be shy.
So, over there, Datuk Shan. Hi, you need a mic? And can you pass back to me? Yeah. You want to come up?
Twan, your Garden of Evening Mist was turned into a movie. What were the pros and cons for you of that event?
Of what? Of the book
Of
being
the
turned
book
into
being
a
turned into a movie.
I can tell you that the pros wasn't the money because it was very little. It was so small. The pros was that the book suddenly reached out to a wider audience, the sort of audience who normally would not have read novels or would have read my novels or historical novels or literary fiction. They suddenly were aware of my book and they were curious about it. So it's a great form of advertisement. Any movie is, and what's even better is that it's that advertisement is almost permanent because the movie is always there. It's not like an ad campaign where it comes and goes and then it's gone. But the movie is always playing somewhere in some streaming service or somebody's screen in the world. So it's a huge advantage to have your book adapted into a film, and more so when it was done as well as they did. If the film had stunk, then it would have been detrimental, I think, to the novel, because people watch the film and say, "Oh, this is such an awful film that the book must surely be even worse." So, but they did a great job, for which I was very relieved and grateful, and it really helped. I've been to places where somebody would come up and say, "Oh, I saw that film of yours. I never read your book before, but after watching the film, I bought all 3 of your books." And so that is very helpful with that.
Thank you.
This gentleman here and then this lady.
It's a problem of growing old. We have to keep changing glasses again. I can't see you with my reading glasses.
Hello.
Hello?
Just to build on this question regarding the book being adapted, I guess from a writer's perspective, how do you feel about seeing your book being adapted into a film? Do you get a say in perhaps like I get to keep this scene or I get to keep this character? And maybe a second part to this is when you were writing The House of Doors and building on what you've talked earlier about visual imagery, do you see the characters? Do you sort of see the scenes playing out as a movie when you are writing a book?
Okay, with your first question, I didn't have much say in the filmmaking process because I'm not a huge million seller, so you only have any clout when you sell your Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or John Grisham. Then they have to listen to you. But with me, no, they were contractually bound to listen to my views, but they weren't contractually bound to follow what I said. So what they say is, okay, well, we're showing you this, you like it or not? I said, no, okay, fine, it's okay, we're showing you this. So that's how the reality of the business was, and I had to accept it. And with this, your second question, yes, I think it's the same for all writers, because how else are you going to transcribe what's in here down to the page? So it's almost downloading the visual image. So I have to see, and every scene is visualized, especially as I mentioned before, the opening and the last scene. I really know what it looks like. I don't know why they're there or what they're doing there. And with this book, it was even much better because all along I had the final sentence already. I knew that this sentence is how I'm going to end this book with. This is the last sentence of the book. The question was, how do I get to that thing? So every element in this book was, it's like an arrowhead. It was pointing straight, going towards the last sentence. And in a way that helped a lot because I knew how it would end.
Thank you.
Hi, Twan, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. I have this question. Infidelity features very largely in this book. You have, Leslie with Arthur, and then Willie with Gerald, and then even Robert with Peter, his lover. And then
Thanks for dropping all the spoilers.
I am sorry, but what I wanted to ask
Let's just remember her face, you all can.
My apologies, but I wanted to ask, and one of the characters asked Willie, why are you so cynical, I wonder if this reflects your perception about marriage, because there is no mention of marriage, infidelity in The Gift of Rain. It was very much, very strong love, which couples had, and yeah, so I would love your thoughts on that.
Well, it's. I suppose it's because these characters have to be in the story. You're right about that. It's very. When I finished writing this book, I was surprised by a few things. First of all, that I managed to finish it. Secondly, was that how anti-marriage the book is. It wasn't intentional. It was just how the characters, the dynamics of their characters. So it is very anti-marriage in many ways. And I realized that the only person who is the happiest in this book is Gerald Haxton. And many people hate Gerald Haxton. They told me as well, like, why did you put Gerald in that book? It's so disgusting. And I told them, look at it. Gerald he's the happiest person in the book because why? He lives life the way he wants to. He doesn't care what anyone thinks of him. He's happy, he's free, and there's no hypocrisy around him. He tells you what he wants, and he'll offer this to you, and if you can supply it. Whereas with Leslie and the other characters, all of them, they're so terrified of what society says of them, so their entire lives are all lived under this veil of hypocrisy. And consequently, they are not happy at all, they're not free. And that's, I think, how society was in 100 years ago, because so many things that it still is as it is. Love to hear your backstory. So it's anti-marriage and also anti-hypocrisy. Many people assume that Somerset Maugham wrote only about murder and lust and adultery, but actually he was criticizing hypocrisy in all his stories. He was a hypocrite, yes, but he was also a victim of hypocrisy as well. So he felt very strongly about that. But you are right. It's not a romantic novel. It's not a love story at all here. It's a very realistic take on the transactional nature of marriages then and now as well, because there's always an offer and acceptance in legal terms in any marriage, even though we deny it, but it's always there.
Correct. One last question.
Hi, Twan. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us. I just wanted to ask, Robin Choi here.
Oh, hello, Robin.
Hi. Were the years of your lawyering
Yes.
detrimental to your writing? Were it helpful or no effect at all? And was it very difficult to move on from being a lawyer to being a writer?
No, the years of being a lawyer were not detrimental as well, and in fact, they were very helpful in many aspects. First of all, they forced me to grow up because we started working when we were quite young and naive and immature. So being a lawyer forces you to grow up because you really have to deal with so many difficult people, clients, partners, and colleagues as well. You can't go in there and still act like a student. So that was really helpful, having to learn to cope with all that pressure. It also forces one to be professional in dealing with people as well. Because writing is a profession, although a lot of writers don't seem to realize that it was really helpful. And I worked for under Daryl Kuhn for a while, so I didn't enjoy it, and he knows it. But he really taught me a lot of things as well. In terms of writing, also yes, because with when you're drafting a legal statement, again under Daryl's tutelage, you really have to be clear and concise and not fudge around, and every word for Daryl counted. So his influence is very much in my writing as well. Every word has to count, has to mean something. You just can't simply throw a word in there and not know its meaning and just hope that it looks pretty and sounds pretty, so it's going to say, you can't do that. So that's been very helpful, yes. And I would recommend that any person who wants to be a writer actually work as a lawyer for a few years.
All right. Oh, okay.
Okay. I'd like to know that just as you mentioned, you you do lots of research of the historical events or biographies of the characters you create. So I'd like to know that how do you use the real historical events in the novels or maybe some of the fictions, and what's your intention to use that to illustrate?
Well, as you know, I'm fascinated by global, huge events in history, but it's very difficult to write these massive, cataclysmic events. And I think sometimes it's quite boring to write and read about them as well. That's a problem with history. It can't get too much. My approach has always been to approach it from a slightly different angle, from the footnotes of history. Not the main thing, but to use people on the fringes or on the margins, on the footnotes, and see the role they played in this big, huge event. Hence, Leslie is really a minor cog in the 1911 revolution of China, but she is one of millions of minor cogs which helped the revolution happen and which are not talked about, because they all see these glamorous names, Sun Yat-sen and all that, they were the heroes. But my research of Sun Yat-sen was he wasn't that great a hero at all, so. And it's basically the ground army that kept it going, and these are the people that have been forgotten by history. So the way to write about these events, I feel, is to give it a human side, and the human side is often the unnamed people, that they are the ones who do the most interesting things. In my research, when I'm doing research, I've often been surprised by how often I'm reading on the main page of this huge event, and suddenly there's an asterisk, and it goes down to the footnote, and I'm suddenly reading this footnote, and it's so much more fascinating than what's on top, And it's really about this person who did this during this war, and it's so much more colorful and alive than these facts. So you really have to look at different outer limits instead of just focusing on the main story. I think that helps a lot.
All right. Thank you.